Okay, well, originally I studied literature, French and German literature, going sort of way back, and then started doing live art actually and performance, and that gravitated into video art. I kind of went back then and studied an MA in visual arts, and got my first Arts Council funding just shortly after that for a short film, Fire Practice Theatre, which I made with a crew. So that's where the kind of video art started to sort of morph into film, really. And then after that, a few years after that, I got funding for the Ghost Empire project, and that began a series of films there. So it's I've worked though in many different media, and I still do. There's a lot of writing, both art criticism and also kind of memoir, novel type writing as well. So I never really see myself fitting directly into any category. I just always tend to be slightly in between a couple of different categories. But yeah, I do tend to define myself as a filmmaker and writer if pushed. Yeah, I was doing part of this think tank in Ireland called Troubling Ireland. It was with these curators called Curatorisk Action and the Fire Station Artist Studios in Dublin. And we were looking at Ireland from a post-colonial perspective and feminist perspective as well, and travelled around Ireland, did an exhibition and a book and various things. And my research was looking at sexuality and post-colonialism. And that was when I discovered, this was just over 10 years ago, that there were, I think at the time, 45 countries that used British colonial laws to criminalise LGBT people. It's now actually 33, because Antigua and Barbuda was the latest just a few weeks ago to decriminalise through the courts. But that figure was just so striking to me, and it was something I didn't know before, that I just thought that there was the potential for some kind of project there. And I developed it a little bit and applied for then the Arts Council funding, and the ball started rolling after that, really. Some of the countries, to Belize, in Belize as well, to an extent, there were savings clauses. I mean, particularly Jamaica, actually, they're very stringent, where the colonial laws have to remain; they can't be challenged at all. So it's even more. So that's been a problem in the Caribbean, of how to challenge the laws. That's why a lot have gone to like the Inter-American Commission as opposed to direct challenges. But so Belize had a more modern constitution. It was decolonized later, so it wasn't so much of a problem. But yeah, I mean, I suppose that is the one of the legacies, that there is just this antiquated, a lot of antiquated laws as well. And I guess even the title Ghost Empire was trying to convey that of you know, this empire that's still kind of there, really, and that people are almost colonial subjects, really, still, or certain people anyway. So the whole notion of time, in the Cyprus film, it was black and white, you know, to convey this unrecognized place and this kind of place where it was still illegal. But here, that was the intention of using the sepia and the blue tint. It was evoking that kind of early silent era where films were beginning to be tinted kind of yellow and blue to signify night and day, or exterior and interior. And I was also thinking of the logwood, which was one of the sort of the slavery industries, and it was used for dye, a kind of purple dye. So I was thinking about tinting and dyes as well, in relation to colonialism. But yeah, I think the sepia was just a different way to approach that, kind of trying to historicize something, or trying to, because that particular route is a sort of attempt to be a kind of real-time going down the river, the way the logs would have gone down the river, really, when they were chopped and exported, really, sort of in centuries ago. So yeah, there's a lot of, you know, playing with the notion of time, and that was why it was good to have such a long duration of filming, you know, intermittently, because it just allowed the aging process to happen, and probably even more so because things were so hard on him. So you can really see him going from this kind of elfin boy kind of Caleb to this man, and for me it's quite striking, the change in a minute, and it creates this sense of time passing, and I think gives a kind of integrity to the film as well. You sort of feel like you're really seeing him as a character, a person. Yeah, I mean, the previous two films were on the north of Cyprus and Singapore. So there were actually very few cases being taken at that time, 10 years ago. Now there are many, many cases being taken worldwide. But Cyprus was to do with, I was really interested in the geopolitics of Cyprus, a divided place, and Singapore. I was interested in other colonial legacies as well, because there's a lot of censorship and other laws like, you know, death penalty and sedition laws that are still used. So with Belize, I was really interested in the legacy of slavery, particularly because it was a subject that started to be being talked about. Especially sort of Scotland's role, because I'm originally from Scotland, and that's become a kind of a topic that people want to discuss now in the last 10 years, really, that Scotland has benefited from, and particularly from the Caribbean. So I kind of struggled a little bit with how to position myself in the film, and you know, in the end, I found this myth of this Peter Wallace, who allegedly founded Belize City, who was the Scottish pirate, and sort of played a kind of cameo role of this pirate. But yeah, I met Caleb at this party, actually, that I was invited to by an NGO in London back in 2014, it was. And we got talking. I'd been looking at the Belize case anyway for the previous year or two, because it had already begun, and I was just trying to decide whether to maybe do that as well. But it seemed like a dangerous place to go. So I admit that I was hesitant, actually. I mean, I knew how much abuse he was already getting. But it was on my radar, and anyway, we met and chatted, and I started sort of filming him in London after that, because he was there quite a lot. He did a residency with Stonewall, and he would be kind of flown over by various NGOs to do talks as well, because it was kind of one of the very first cases that was taken by the NGOs, and yeah, I think he sort of became a bit of a celebrity, really, in those circles. I'd say he is now for sure, but yes, so that was really the beginning, and I think he probably wasn't sure what, you know, how it would materialize, because I think lots of people have done kind of little small, you know, videos or interviews with him, but it grew, and then I did, you know, travel to Belize a couple of years after that, and you know, filmed him then, and it kind of carried on then, at various intervals, really. And then the last time I filmed him was just basically a few weeks prior to the pandemic, the lockdown happening in London. I met him just after the appeal verdict had been given, beginning of 2020, and we were in the House of Commons and the Foreign Office in various places, so it was a great place to film him, and talking quite positively at that point. At that point, there seemed like things were going pretty well. That there was an equality bill that was being tabled. That's not happened, but that was a nice moment to leave the film on. The equalities bill that was talking about that was being tabled basically just after the appeal took place, and that Caleb was talking about at the end of the film, it's a very progressive piece of legislation, and it involved some drafting from international organizations as well. It was very good on kind of women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and it even included provisions for intersex people. So it was really groundbreaking. But there was a lot of opposition to it. You can see some of the opposition within the film, people talking about sort of, you know, gender, and that this would be in your schools and all this kind of language, really. But it's resulted in basically in it being paused. There's a new government anyway, and it may return at some point, but it's not looking imminent really, which is a pity because it was going to be a really important piece of legislation. But there has been a huge amount of change, I think, and Caleb, despite all the sacrifice that he's had to make really to take this case, I think he's justifiably proud of having really sort of, you know, as he would see, I think, dragged the country into, you know, a sort of much more progressive place. You know, still quite a lot of work to do, and you know, with his sister also was really important in that, actually. But I think that the fact that you don't really, you know, he's really the only person who's out in the film. I mean, I think having just one character to focus on, you know, can make a film stronger, but it's also just purely because there weren't a lot of people that would be willing to be out. There are a handful now, but people just simply didn't find it a safe thing to do. So it's particularly brave of him, but it's also indicative really of the lack of safety. It's a place where there's, you know, a fair bit of gun violence and that kind of thing anyway, as you can hear from the film. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a feeling of progression, but there's still that element of lack of safety at times. He's definitely somebody I'm still in touch with, and he was kind of a slow burn, so I feel quite close to him now. I mean, we don't communicate all the time, but we do, you know, from time to time. But yeah, I do feel close to him, and I think it's mutual, from sort of messages sent me or whatever after the film. But I think at the beginning he was probably quite defensive because of all the stuff that he's had to deal with, and also just that there've been a lot of interest, but people not really following up on that. So just doing, you know, like small videos or whatever. So I don't think he necessarily knew where it was going at that point. But yeah, I spent sort of lots of different moments with them over different in different years. So I suppose from 2014, well, through to the present, although I haven't seen them since 2020. So I a lot of the time in London, and then also in Belize, really, and then meeting his family in Belize as well. So yeah, it's been a lot of different moments really, but yeah, the film obviously takes place in both London and in Belize as well. I suppose since you're asking me about the personal stuff, I mean, his sister passed away just before it premiered really last year, and so I made a film for him of all the extra footage really that I had of Golda, because I had actually quite a bit, and in some ways I regret not putting more of her in the film, because I sort of understood retrospectively how important she actually was to the whole fight and the case and everything really. So there's a little 20-minute film that I don't quite know what he's done with, but he was delighted to have it anyway. Just called Golda really. So it's almost like the other side of the film, but it's not particularly public, but yeah, so I suppose there was that kind of closeness where you have this material as well and kind of want to sort of preserve it really for him, because it was obviously such a huge loss for him as well. Yeah, I suppose I was talking about it recently, and somebody talked about it as a work in progress, and they didn't mean one particular film. I think they meant that the whole project. And I thought about that. I thought, yes, because I don't really know when it will end, in a sense. I mean, there's still 33 countries. I could kind of see myself doing individual films for the rest of my life, really, you know, alongside other projects. But I could imagine coming back to it again and again, you know, hopefully well, I mean, hopefully things will be decriminalized quickly. They certainly are likely to be in the Caribbean. I think there's 9 countries taking cases there, and one has already been, Antigua and Barbuda, as I said, has already been decriminalized. So of the ones that remain, I think there's a good likelihood that most of them will be. But yeah, I could see myself returning to it again and again, because there's something there that really fascinates me and kind of draws me back, you know, even when I could easily just let it go and just do other maybe related things. But I hope that it's a film project that can be shown, you know, well after the time has passed, when it's sort of immediate, if you like. And that's happened with Cyprus in particular, actually, that film, because it was made in 2013, 2014, it was finished. And it's, I mean, it was last shown a couple of months ago, so it's had a good longevity so far. There's something about the geopolitics of that, as well as the LGBT situation, that just seemed to last, really. And I think it's a film I'm quite happy with. So I'm hoping that that will be the same with this film, and maybe hopefully some subsequent films as well, that they are historical documents in a sense, because, well, I mean, nobody else has made films on those particular cases, and with Belize, very, very short films have been made. So they do tell a history. So yeah, I would like them to kind of have that quality, as well as hopefully maybe sort of leading to some change, or actually participating in it as well. And I have shown them to some extent in, you know, more governmental or political situations as well. So that would be my hope too. Yeah.